Welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast, and thank you for joining us. This is Rick Wirtz, president and founder of Faithful Fathering, where the mission is to encourage and equip dads to be faithful fathers. The vision is to engage dads in raising a godly generation by reinvigorating the church on the fathering front. We're continuing the discussion around why faithful fathering is important. We're here to help you be the dad the next generation needs. So I do want to point you to our website, faithfulfathering.org, where you can click on the For Dads button for more information, and that certainly complements what these podcasts are all about. In the studio today with me we're going to talk about a continuing discussion around foster care and you. The guest here to join me today is Julius Karow. He's a founder of Kingdom Care Ministries. Is that the right title? I want to make sure I get you right.
It's
there.
Kingdom Care Orphan Care. But yes, that's right.
Okay, Kingdom Care Orphan Care. Okay, well, that's a blessing to have you here, Julius. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're a husband and father, husband of Shanda, and you have a father. How many kids do you have now?
So we have 4 adopted, and we have a 19-year-old that we are fostering, and she has a 1.5-year-old. So
Fantastic.
We have 6 currently in our home.
And how did you give us a background on how you got involved with foster care to begin?
Background, God kind of started it young in my life. I was adopted by my grandparents. My grandmother was actually adopted as well.
Okay.
And so for us, foster care, not really foster care, but adoption was always big in our life. We accidentally got into foster care. Me and my wife started about 11 years ago. We decided that we were going to adopt a kid and have our own kid. Of course, God has His own plans. So we
really,
So we did. So we started the adoption. What we thought was the adoption process. So we went through an agency. Back then, CPS used to have these little info meetings, and it was kind of like pick your agency. So your agencies would come and they would talk and give their spills. And so we ended up picking an agency. We went through through the adoption process as far as getting licensed to be an adoptive parent. And so we trained in the Spring location for Arrow Child and Family Ministries. And then we were transferred to the Angleton office. When we were transferred to the Angleton office, we got put in the foster care pile. Okay. It took us about 4 placements to figure out that we were not in the adoption part of the process. Our first child was a 3-year-old little boy, and he stayed for about 3 months. Then we got a sibling set of 3 girls, a newborn, a 3-year-old, and a 7-year-old. They left about 3 months later as well.
Okay.
And then after that, we got a little boy who was actually abandoned, or so we thought at that point in time, and he ended up leaving about 2 months later.
How old was he?
He was newborn. He was actually on the news. It was a big story about finding a baby behind a dumpster, and
wow.
we got that baby.
All right.
And so
back up just a minute. You said you were going through. Was it an application process to be an adoptive parent? What was that?
So fostering. So the way the state of Texas has it, to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, you have to be licensed through the state of Texas.
Okay.
Now, there are private adoptions and different things like that may be different, but as far as adopting through the foster care system, your licensing is the same. Most of the kids, or actually all of the kids that we have adopted, have been foster placements first, and then rights have terminated or so forth and so on, and then they become eligible for adoption, and we adopt them. That's how we've adopted 4 out of 29 that have been placed in our home.
Now, what type of things are they looking for in this? So when you apply and get a license to adopt,
so you have to go through training that's mandated by the state. So there's certain training courses and certain trainings that you have to have. You have to get CPR certified, first aid certified. They do a home study as far as your background, your current living status, just all the different things as far as that you would think that they would want. They ask a bunch of questions. They send a psychologist out to interview you and your wife. And
this sounds like something we ought to implement for every parent, huh?
that's one thing that we've talked about, and we've seen different shirts and stuff that say that. Actually, it says licensed to parent, literally.
Premarital counseling would take on a whole new dimension if you had to do CPR.
Yes, and so we definitely. I mean, and they interview you separately. I mean, it was a pretty extensive process. At that point in time, everything was done in person, so it took us about a year. When we did it, I was 25 and my wife was 24. So we were on the younger side of that.
Right.
In fact, at that point in time, legally in the state of Texas, she wasn't eligible to be an adoptive parent or a foster parent because at that point the age was 25.
Right.
And so I grandfathered her in a way, or
You
got
covered
her. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we both worked full time. We were both full time students when we started, and that's just kind of how.
So okay, that's fascinating. I think the average person does, or I sure didn't realize. Maybe I'm not average, but I didn't realize you're talking about a year and a half process to apply and get a license to even have a potential for adopting a child.
Now it's a little bit more streamlined. I mean, with I guess COVID kind of expedited everything to go digital, so they have Zoom meetings and live meetings online and stuff like that. So you can, I mean, if you go through the process and you do everything, you can now probably get licensed within a month to 3 months, depending on how fast you want to expedite the process with your agency.
So you've had 29 foster care children through your home.
Through our home, yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. What's been the highlight? What was the best experience that you could have imagined?
Man, honestly, just watching God just work in every situation. At one point, we had 6 kids under the age of 3, and I remember.
Did they have a test for sanity before?
No, that wasn't one of the ones that we covered in the questionnaire. But I remember feeling at that point in time like the most peace that I ever felt. Like even in the midst of all the chaos, I never felt the chaos. I just felt God's hand on that process and with those kids and being able to pray for them and just be with them was probably that. And then as much as we've poured into them, they've shown us ourselves, what we want out of life and what's important and what's valuable and that's family and that's friends and loving on each other. That's what's really important. One of the biggest things that I remember just from our foster care journey is our first child was a 3-year-old little boy, and watching it through him, we thought, like I said, we thought we were adopting. So he was, calling us mom, calling us dad. We were going through that whole process, and then we found out. CPS called us, and they were like, well, he's going to go live with a great-grandmother. And so we're like, okay, great-grandmother. This 3-year-old was very rowdy, very rambunctious. And so we were like, well, how is this going to happen? How is this going to work? So, we just prayed and prayed. And so he left. And one day when my cousin called, and I'm from a small town outside in East Texas called Garrison, about 800 people. So my cousin called and he said, do you know where he went? And I said, no, we don't get that information. They take him, they go wherever they go. And he goes, well, I know where he's at. And I said, really? And he's like, yeah, he is at a family friend that we knew from Garrison who was actually the mayor of our town. She was the great-grandmother. And so we connected with her. Once again, only God could have made this story happen with all of these things. And so we connected with her, and she told us, she's like, I knew he was with a good home. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? And she said, well, the first day that he came to us, when I tried to fix him lunch and we sat down to eat, he stopped me and said, no, Grandma, we got to pray first. And so he prayed for their meal.
That's a glimpse of God's glory right there.
Exactly. And so that story itself has literally propelled us through this journey for the last 11 years.
Right. So there you go. That's your answer to, I think, the discussion a lot of times is, how are you supposed to let go of these children? And it sounds like you just exemplified the whole deal, that you had a window of time to touch that young boy. You touched him, and the Lord takes it from there.
Yes,
sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget God is God, and
yes, sir.
nothing is happenstance. It's all by His plan. He is sovereign. What about the most challenging experience that you've run across? What's a tough valley that you had to work through in a foster child coming into your home?
I mean, I think ultimately again, is giving it to God and the lack of control that you have as a foster parent. Because when these kids are placed in your home, you want to protect them just like you would any other child, whether biological or any other way that they come. And so, to see them hurt, to see them, go through pain, to deal with that, I think is probably one of the hardest things as being a foster parent, because you have no control when it comes to like their final place, whether they stay with you or not. Like I said, we've fostered 29 and we've adopted 4, so 25 out of that 29 have went back home. And each one of our foster placements that have returned either directly to their parents or to another family member. And so that's always hard, because it literally is faith in God only, because there's you have no control. The only control I had was when I said yes to the kid at the very beginning. And after that, do they have parent visits? I don't have control over that. Do they stay 3 months or do they stay 3 years? I have no control over that. The only control that I have is the time that I spend with them while I have them in my house. I can love on them and I can show them different. And that's what we do every day in our house with all of our kids is show them something different. Because even if they go back to a world that's dark, we live in a world that's often dark, but even if they go back to a place of darkness, they've seen the light. They've seen something different, which means that they can themselves have something different. And so that's kind of what's propelled us through those hard times of, why do we keep taking, why do we keep saying yes? Why do we keep taking in kids? And watching, because each one of them that leaves, that's a part of our heart that goes with them. But, that's what propels the yes is, knowing that for that minute, they get to be kids, they get to be loved on, they get to be shown something different. And then, God gets to take it from there if they do happen.
Now, once you've adopted the 4, did you put a hold on foster kids coming into your home at that juncture, or you?
No, we've stayed open ever since. We continue to say that we're going to stop, but every time we think that we're going to stop, then we get this specific call that's very specifically for us for some reason, whether it's whatever CPS requested, or somebody that we've worked with in the past has called us and said, hey, can you do this? Before we get in touch with the agency, even sometimes, just because we've been doing it for so long and interacted with so many different people. And so we know at that point, like and our and our motto and our yes has always been, if they call, we're going to say yes, and we'll let God work it out from there. So if they're meant to be here, they're going to be here. If not, then we've seen that both ways. But yeah.
All right. So the biggest challenge is the unknown.
Yes. That is ultimately the biggest challenge in every child that's placed in your home. And even after adoption, it's still a challenge, because a lot of our kids, and all of our kids come from some form of trauma. So I got my daughter at 5 months old. She was addicted to cocaine at birth.
Right.
And so, but now at 8 and 9 years old, we're starting to see the effects of that as she has anxiety and different, mental health related issues that she's, working through, and we're, helping her work through that. But that was something that stemmed, from prenatal stuff
right.
and pre-birth stuff that we had no control over.
Right.
And so ultimately, a lot of foster care and a lot of adoption and all of that entire process is just faith. Like, it is ultimately just us saying, God, whatever you have for us today, we're going to deal with it the best way that we can.
Everybody has their idea of what trauma is, and I think you can clarify this, but my understanding is that trauma can be everything from trauma being taken away out of the home, that's trauma for a child, or it could be some kind of physical abuse, or it could be under the influence of drugs because mom was a crack addict. So is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. Trauma can be every one of those things. There's a wide range of trauma. Neglect is trauma.
Right.
I mean, all
Sure.
of that is traumatic and has a period point. And that's kind of how, when people talk about trauma, how I kind of describe it is it's a point in time in these kids' lives and even our lives. As adults, we have our own traumas. We have things in our past that have, specifically, hurt us in a certain way that's left a lasting impression, and that affects, the decision-making process. That affects, a lot of things that we do in our lives. So all of that broad umbrella could be considered trauma.
Sure. And sometimes we cover it up, and a kid will cover it up until an opportune moment to break out. Now that's all God's stuff, and I applaud you and your bride for being God's hands and feet for these young kids. Now, with that, could you maybe articulate a little bit of encouragement for a dad or a couple that are listening here that may be considering getting involved with foster care?
Ultimately, God has you in your hands. If He's called you to it, He's already prepared you for it, and He's already has a plan. He already has it's thought out and it planned out, and He's going to take care of it. His promises are true. He will walk you through it. He will guide you through it. And like I said, I say that because that's literally been our entire journey. It's been, God has opened doors and moved pieces and made things happen. One thing with our ministry with Kingdom Care is that we do wrap around and provide support for these families. And so you're not alone in that environment. That's one thing that we learned through foster care, was that there's a lot of support for the kids. There's a lot of things that happen, while you're a foster parent. But, once you've adopted, or once, the limited resources are there, it just kind of stops. The community and the people of knowing what's going on, that isn't there. And so that's what we do with Kingdom Care, is we build that community, we build that support. And so if you're wanting to be a foster parent, or you want, I think God is calling you to adopt, there's resources and there's people out here who have done it and are willing to walk with you and through the entire process.
There you go. That's a word from a veteran on the journey of adoption and foster care. Thank you, Julius, for your time. And dads, I just want to remind you, you heard what he said. The Lord doesn't call the prepared; He prepares the called. And the encouragement is that there's a lot of support out there for you, whether it's Kingdom Care, others that are in the system that are there to help. So just, again, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of background here, a little bit of the personal journey that Julius and his bride have been on, and just want you to know that if that's what the Lord's calling you to, then step into it with all the boldness and confidence it is your personal relationship with Christ. Well, thank you, Julius, for your time. God bless, Godspeed.
Thank you for having me.
We'll talk to you again soon.